while and a very important part. But let me just give you a small intro. She is a visual artist, writer, and educator working between Lahore and Washington, D.C. And she earned her BFA from National College of Arts, NCA, 2013, and did her MFA from Mass Art in 2018. And that she went on Fulbright scholarship. Her practice often revolves around the possibilities and limitations of language and is often positioned in the indeterminate spaces of translation, cultural friction, and semantic gaps. Madyha has been the participant of Hamiltonian Fellowship, Mansion Art Residency, Delta Research Placement at the Flat Time House, Siena Art Institute Artist Residency, and the Murray Museum Residency. She has exhibited her works internationally at various platforms across the America, Asia, and Europe. Madyha has also written on art and has teaching experience at NCA Lahore, Mass Art, and Art and Design Boston, and BNU Lahore. So here we have her again. So please welcome her so she can start her talk.
Thank you so much for having me here today. Apologies about the delay. Tech sometimes it just doesn't do what you want it to do. It's the story of my life. अभी भी एक प्रोजेक्टर पे शायद आपको मेरा काम completely purple नजर आए, तो kind of divert your attention that way. Please try to look at that screen. Otherwise, I guess just enjoy. Okay, so before we start, I kind of want to give a few disclaimers about my practice, and as you'll delve deeper into it, there are a few points to keep in your mind. One of them is that actually I don't have a particularly strong belief in art, especially as a vocation. This is because I don't believe that art की कोई ऐसी fixed boundaries हैं या उसको कोई ऐसे specific तरीके से define किया जा सकता है या इसके अंदर participate करना कोई इतना ज़रूरी है. So why do I continue to do it? I feel that it is it's one of the only places where one can be mobile between disciplines, where you can take an inquiry और आप इसको किसी भी तरीके से approach कर सकते हैं. इस discipline के उस तरह से कोई burdens नहीं है, proof के burdens, evidence के burdens जो कि science में होते हैं, etc. etc. And also I feel that in the present world, art it's a way to camouflage yourself actually. It's a way to take an inquiry and kind of run with it without having, the history of the discipline kind of bearing down on you. And in the similar notion, I reject the idea of essentialism. By that I mean कि किसी भी चीज़ के कोई ऐसे खसूसियात हों जो होना ज़रूरी हो उसको to be defined as such. So for example, to be called a man, you must have X, Y, Z, or to be called a woman, you must have X, Y, Z characteristics. Similarly, I feel that art के अंदर भी कोई ऐसे fixed X, Y, Z characteristics नहीं है जो कि होना ज़रूरी है. So when I reject the idea of essentialism, I also question the notions of authenticity, of signature style, of authorship, etc., etc. And by that I mean as you go through and you will see my work, it changes a lot. It changes project to project. It changes year to year. I keep going forward and I keep coming back to things. And this is something that I did struggle with for a while because I feel that in our present artistic, infrastructure, there is often a burden to simplify yourself. And to simplify yourself into something that is coherent and that is understandable as a soundbite, in like a 2-minute attention span, right? And I also felt that burden because obviously, like as you go through these applications and these grants, etc., there is a performativity within that, right? But I also kind of embraced the idea that my work is not going to look like itself. It's going to be one thing in the morning and another thing in the evening. And that's okay. It's because, the world that we occupy today, आप इतनी diverse चीजें consume कर रहे होते हैं, right? You're on the one hand consuming a Korean drama, and on the other hand, you're talking about, you're looking at your mom's thus in the morning. These are such poles apart that it's kind of impossible for us to have an expectation of consistency. So I have fully embraced the fact fact that, that my work might not be recognizable as mine. Having said that, there are a few kind of consistent strains of thought that are related in my mind, and I'm okay with that. The other thing that I kind of want to emphasize on is embracing the notion of hybridity and nonlinear time. And by that I mean that I do not lay claim to a singular past, and I do not lay claim to a singular idea of the future either. I feel कि हम again एक ऐसी दुनिया में मौजूद हैं जहाँ पे हम multiple pasts को access कर सकते हैं, even अगर वो हमारे अपने pasts ना हो. Similarly, हम multiple futures को भी influence कर सकते हैं without even sometimes intending to. And in terms of hybridity, I think that this is hybridity between mediums, hybridity between the idea of identity, and as I mentioned earlier, time. And the last thing I wanted to remember is the politics of attention, which I spoke about a little bit earlier. कि हमें expect किया जाता है कि हमारा काम often एक wide variety of things that are swirling around in your mind will go through a funnel and it will become one simple linear thing that will be understandable, that somebody will be able to kind of consume in a matter of minutes. And this is something that I have struggled with in my practice, and I keep changing my position on it. I'm not sure it's fully resolved yet. But I have kind of come around to the idea that we have to engender specific kinds of attentions. It's not enough to kind of give up and say कि हाँ वाकई complexity को छोड़ देना चाहिए और contradiction को छोड़ देना चाहिए और हमें चीज़ों को आसान कर देना चाहिए for the viewer. I feel like you have to make the viewer do some work as well. And I've kind of also made peace with the fact that some of the work will be understandable as one simple thing on first viewing, but it will require a revisiting. For the really committed viewer, it might reward them more, right? So I do kind of return this sense of agency to the viewer, that it's not just me dictating you with a spoon, okay, this is the work and this is what you should take away from it, but rather that it's okay for the viewer to do some calm as well. Okay, having said that, I'm going to start with this work. So I'm going to show a kind of narrow selection today that I put together somewhat thematically. And this is the first thing that I want to show you. This is a manifesto that I designed in 2016. It's basically independently published, small book. And it's printed on, tracing paper, butter paper, and it kind of opens from both sides. So एक तरफ से आप English पढ़ते हैं और दूसरी तरफ से उसको उल्टा करके you can also read, and the both things kind of meet in the middle. And as you continue to read it, it starts to fade. So really this kind of demonstrates what I was talking about, in terms of the attention of the viewer, that over time it becomes harder and harder to read. So you really have to sit down and look at each page independently, put it against light to be able to read it. And the manifesto actually described, it considered the possibility of silence as an artistic strategy. What I mean by that I will come back to in a minute. And on the one side, it basically described the theoretical and conceptual premise of why I'm interested in this. And on the other side, it kind of listed all possible strategies जिसके through मैं यहाँ तक पहुँच सकती हूँ. So what I mean by silence as an artistic strategy is basically, as Hifsa described earlier, that a lot of my practice is centered around the limitations of language and finding those limitations to be a productive space or to be a space of creation. This is what I kind of call silence. It's not the deafening of auditory noise, but the deafening of language, and how to kind of overcome it, how to challenge it, how to make it do things that it's not supposed to do, etc., etc. So basically, this is a manifesto that is kind of working against the idea of language as we understand it. And I will talk about some of the ideas through which one can do it. And I also want to say that जो इसकी strategies वाली side I kind of look at that as a manifesto in progress. So every time a new thing occurs to me, I continue to add to it. And I feel that I only have a limited lifetime, and if I wanted to create portfolios of work out of each strategy, it would take years. So I just take the listing of that strategy or that idea as somewhat the realization itself. And although this is a manifesto in progress, I feel like at the moment I'm kind of outgrowing this document as well. So, I might change my allegiances, who knows, we'll see. So some of these strategies kind of include the idea of literalism. So literalism has a kind of bad reputation in art school, right? Your teachers often tell you, ये तो बड़ा literal है, ये तो आपने बड़ा direct कर दिया है. And I find that kind of amusing because I feel that it's actually really impossible to be literal. And what I mean by that is that if I try to say that somebody is as brave as a lion, and it feels kind of like, it's a metaphor, but it feels kind of literal, right? It's काफी direct है. But actually we don't know how a lion might feel brave, how a lion, how one might feel like a lion, etc., etc. So I feel that actually if we go into the depths of language, it is impossible for one descriptive word to map completely onto the concept. So it is impossible to be literal. Language always kind of evades reality and it evades the meaning to which we are attaching it. So what I try to do is that I take this very seriously and I try to become very, very literal and see कि उसके अंदर से क्या result आता है, right? Instead of trying to avoid it and using metaphor, etc., etc., I try to kind of think of language as as an instruction and then try to become literal. The other strategy is plasticity, and I will come back to it a little bit later. So this is a work that kind of arose from the manifesto. It's a 3-part essay film, and it's divided into 3 chapters. The first is called Sirens, and it kind of talks about my dissatisfactions with the traditional notions of the idea of expression, of the idea that the self is a unified inherent concept, etc., etc. And the second chapter then describes, the second chapter is called Stylus, as in a pen. It describes the inadequacy of language, the inadequacy of expression, and the fact that these are imperfect strategies. And the final chapter is kind of a call to enact what I say is silence. And the visual language of the film is kind of sensory overstimulation. So you see these kind of 9 screens that are installed together. In the middle, ये 3 chapters run करते हैं, and the other 9 screens kind of work in correspondence with these, and they form like associative linkages with what's happening on screen. You can wear the headphone to listen to one chapter at a time, and you can kind of lie down or go back to look at multiple screens at once. At some key moments, the videos all come together to form a unitary image before it kind of disperses again. Somewhat like the nature of language, sometimes it comes together and it feels really clear and then it falls apart again. So when I talk about sensory overstimulation, basically how I arrived at this film was that I looked at the textual tagging of content on the internet. So I put my text manifesto in front of me, and I would take keywords from it, and I would look for found footage, archival footage, YouTube videos that are tagged as that. And it was really, really interesting how one word can lead to so many possible realizations in video. And therefore, this was put together as as an amalgamation of all of these different clips. And eventually, like the content kind of almost involuntarily became like stock footage, social media content, archival footage, and kind of like the language kind of became about optics as well, because the manifesto itself was talking so much about art, so a lot of footage from like self-help, militaristic technologies, all of that kind of came together. Medicine as well, particularly. Okay. So this is a realization of the manifesto, the kind of first one. And basically, when I was saying plasticity, this is somewhat what I meant. By plasticity, I mean the fact that language को कोई material शक्ल दी जाए, उसको कोई दुनिया के अंदर एक ऐसी शक्ल दी जाए जिसको छुआ जा सके, जिसको feel किया जा सकते अपनी senses के साथ, right? Because once that happens, then language is no longer independent. Language is no longer just a concept. It's now an object in the world. Mathematical concepts, etc., etc. So, I kind of call this neither word nor image, nor representation, nor symbolism, nor abstraction, nor form, nor content, nor expression, nor introspection, nor none of these, but all of these in variable quantities. So in the diagram, I was taking the language of mathematical certainty, right? The idea कि अगर कोई इस तरीके से चीज़ बनी हुई होगी, तो वो आपको कोई clarity देगी या कोई एक fixed fact देगी. I take that and I kind of play with it in a more poetic format. I'm not going to be able to go into each component of this work, but I'll expand on a few small ones. So these are what I call non-linear poems. And you can kind of read them in any direction. But however you read them, actually, the meaning more or less remains the same, which is the forward pull of time. Right? And inke darmiyan mein, these are clock mechanisms that move in the installation. And I felt that these were kind of, the kineticism of this work kind of added to the idea that you could read it in any direction, so it didn't feel fixed. And also because I was, talking about the nature of time, in a way these clocks kind of keep time, but they don't tell you the time, right? Because they're all synchronized, they're all the second hand, but you cannot say कि अभी वक्त क्या हुआ है. This is a graph on the side which speaks about a list of suggested activities with time in irreversible order. And here the idea of literalism comes back into play. So I took basically phrases जो हम time के साथ इस्तेमाल करते हैं. Find time, lose time, make time, serve time, etc., etc. And I put them on a graph, and most of these are antonyms or opposites. So find and lose, spend and save, own and free, use and waste, pass and pause, crunch, hit, kill, serve, consume. So it feels like there is a wide variety of things one can do with time. However, once you really look into the depths of it, actually not at all. It's whether you use time or waste time, time only moves forward. So it's immaterial, the language that we use to describe it. It's, the experience of time is the same. This is a small kind of Venn diagram in the middle. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Venn diagrams, but being art students, I'm guessing maybe. So this kind of described the perfect overlap of a self and another, an artist and a viewer, and the source of a silence and the reception of that silence. But this Venn diagram ko maine design kiya tha as a clock. So in the middle one is the second hand that's moving, the smallest one. The slightly larger one is the minute hand, and the largest one is the hour. So this overlap actually kind of continues to shift slightly. And alongside this, I had an equation basically kind of, describing this perfect overlap. So again, using the language of mathematical certainty to act as if this is an easy recipe, right? However, to arrive at that perfect overlap is almost absurd. It's not like you can do this through the help of an equation. We know nothing about how to arrive at that. And then these diagrams kind of continued to grow, and they became more and more architectural. These walls were kind of movable, discrete objects. And I started describing more things through the aid of these diagrams. And they also became somewhat mobile. In a lot of these, the clock mechanisms also evolved. अभी तक जो थे वो kind of move forward करते थे, अब वो architecture का हिस्सा बन गए. A lot of them also started moving backwards. So it was the second hand, but it would move backwards. Again, keeping the same time, but not being able to tell what the time is. And this is a more recent one that was made alongside the manifesto. This kind of used poetic language to arrive at that perfect overlap and yet continues to fail. I think you guys might have seen some of this in your office, a small representation of this in your office. So this is another work in which the notion of plasticity was emphasized. Again, by plasticity I mean language को कोई physical form देना, so that its meaning is modified by its objectness, by the fact that it exists in the world as a thing rather than just the word itself. This is called Everything is Found Wanting, and it's made out of plastic. It's a very fine web, a very large, fine web-like scale made out of plastic, in which the sentence, everything is found wanting, is written over and over and over again. And I found that this sentence was particularly kind of interesting to me because इसका मतलब literally ये है everything is found wanting का कि कोई चीज़ perfect नहीं है. हर चीज़ जो है वो किसी ना किसी तरीके से incomplete है या it's found wanting as in it's not doing what it's supposed to do, right? However, if you think of wanting as a verb, I feel that this was still applicable, as in everything is found wanting something, everything is found desiring something. And I kind of enjoyed this a lot because this was, again, like I was writing with like a small extruded plastic pen, and I felt at some points it was very like low tech, kind of itch tech. And I enjoy that a lot because I feel like tech के अंदर अभी तक हमने वो high tech और low tech वाली divide to a certain extent रखी हुई है. And by that I mean that we are obsessed with 4K videos, with the latest thing in images, with the highest resolution camera, etc., etc. Whereas I feel that the tools that we do have that are kind of inexpensive actually do a pretty good job of making work. And I felt that this one particularly also started to resemble like low-tech cake icing a little bit, and I enjoyed that aspect of it. Kind of amused me for a while that in cake icing I was writing such a miserable sentence. This is another work from kind of a similar series. It's called The Index. These are found images of 99 blank pages, and this is an installation photograph. So you see that actually the prints are installed on the wall. And 99 because 99 is one short of being perfect, as in everything is found wanting, but also because we know in Muslim mythology God has 99 names, and seemingly this perfect idea is also one short, right? This complete comprehension of it is always kept at bay from us. These found images were kind of collected from scanned books, stock images. Some of these are digitally simulated textures, so the page didn't exist until it was printed as a photograph. Some of these are from the first blank page of artist books, of library catalogs, etc., of diaries, things like that. And I felt that over time it also started to kind of make an association with skin and the body, and I enjoyed that because while I was making this work, I was thinking a lot about what does blankness look like, right? Because I'm thinking about silence and because I'm thinking about undoing of language, so blank image ka kya matlab hai? And so I started again textually searching for blank pages, and it seemed like blank pages are images, they're not blank. And so when I put these together, actually they carry a lot of import. And occasionally you would also see, a word appear here or there, but you wouldn't see it, when you're at a distance. This is a more recent work. It's called Choose Your Own Father. This is a multi-channel version of it, where 3 synchronized screens kind of play this video. I'm going to talk about this in, okay, let me actually summarize this. So, Choose Your Own Father was made as a result of this research residency that I did with Flattime House in London. Flattime House is the library/estate of John Latham. John Latham is a British conceptual artist who was also thinking about language, who was also thinking about books, who was also thinking about metaphysics a lot. And I'm sure you guys must have seen in your art history classes, his book burning events and whatnot. So when I started kind of engaging with his estate, I started thinking a lot about the idea of influence, right? कि हम कौन सी चीज़ों से inspire होते हैं और हमें इसके बारे में एक anxiety क्यों होती है, right? Because one wants to seek inspiration, but one is always a little bit cautious of going too much forward. And I found that interesting, especially with this residency, because they were asking me to engage with his estate, and why was I feeling this kind of hesitancy towards it? So I started looking a little bit into his family history, And I found that his father, Geoffrey Latham, was actually a colonial administrator who was instrumental in the rise of cinema, in the rise of educational film in particular. Educational film वो ऐसी फिल्में आपने देखी होंगी पीटीवी के ऊपर कोई 9 बजे की खबरों से पहले कॉटन की कपास को अब ये कीड़ा खाने लगा है और फैमिली प्लानिंग किस तरीके से की जाती है etc etc. So educational films are often made by the state for promotional campaigns, so on. The history of educational film is really interesting because this was the time at which the British colonial state was moving from the idea of hard power as a militaristic power to soft power as in images, propaganda, education, so on and so forth. So they put together this program called the Bantu Educational Cinema Experiment, where Geoffrey Latham's father would take a screen and he traveled throughout like northern Rhodesia, Africa, East and Central Africa, British territories ke andar, and they would do like these little shows in small villages on how to plant crops, how to avoid disease, etc etc. And interestingly enough, iska aakhri clip jo hota tha na wo hota tha live in London, and it felt like most of the people came to watch actually life in London because they were not that interested in the other kinds of education that was promising. So I found that again interesting because again the nature of influence, how kind of ideas travel from one place to another, who do they belong to, and then who kind of co-opts them. As I said earlier, that I believe in the notion of non-linear history, that I can co-opt multiple pasts and I can co-opt multiple futures as well. And so I started thinking about this in kind of comparison to my own family history. And it's interesting because as being in the art world for a number of years, I have often come across projects of material histories, of family histories, of nostalgia, etc etc. And I've always kind of felt on the outside of it. I don't fully understand it. I mean, I can see the appeal, but also I can't quite see the appeal sometimes because I don't have a similar family history. And I realized actually that is because my family would be thought of as a perfect example of the promises of modernity, right? Because my grandfather was a nomadic, he was a part of a nomadic tribe, and they settled on land for the first time. Then my father went to college for the first time. Then I went to college outside of Pakistan for the first time. So अगर आप ये क्रॉस सेक्शन लें तो आपको लगेगा कि ये मॉडर्निटी की तरक्की का एक परफेक्ट एग्जांपल है. बट इसके अंदर काफी फ्रैक्चर और लॉस भी है, राइट? बिकॉज language changes. I no longer understand what my grandparents used to speak. The kinds of knowledges that were applicable or that were needed for my grandparents are no longer needed for me, so I have no idea. And I'm not bemoaning it or romanticizing it. I'm just saying that some material histories travel through time more easily than other material histories. And one has to think about that. And especially in terms of like conceptual art, particularly British conceptual art, no one ever talks about the childhood of these artists. It's not something that they've ever considered. So I started thinking about the notion of the father, or the idea of fatherhood a lot. So thinking about Geoffrey Latham, who was John Latham's father, in comparison with my own father, and then using this as a conceptual device to think about how we get influenced by certain things, how we resist that influence, how there is a paternalistic attitude in a certain kind of art history. There's a paternalistic attitude in certain state measures, etc., particularly in relationship with educational film. So I'm going to play a very small excerpt of this, and after that I'll talk a bit more.
Although I had little evidence to support a claim to have been born in, or even on that river, the event certainly took place. Somewhere. Near. Her stories of origin ever really that significant to begin with? Unless, of course, they made up. At first, his father wasn't convinced that films could be very educational. But he came around on the condition that these be segregated gatherings, screening only films made specifically for those eyes. Through his own. His eyes could see more. More land, more copper, more people, more service, more than what was, more than what was needed. Her father wouldn't have been a possibility had the family not laid roots on land. He was born on one of the last nomadic migrations for the tribe and brought with him stability, wealth, and the loss of translation. Perhaps it was some founding father, father of the nation, father of some invention or another, heavenly father, father confessor, father who knew best, the father of lies. That accounts for the fathers. Let me explain myself. I am a unit of time in a world that has lost its geometry. Do I have anything to do with events before or after me? The first or least event is origin. The story of origin is always secondary reporting. No one is truly present at the moment of their own genesis. As a result of the historical forces of specialization, the paternal instructive function of the father is taken over by others, such as the teacher, the state, and even peers. This might suggest that it is now possible to choose one's own father, or even reject the idea of a father altogether. It is possible to perform a socialized hatred of the father in place of his historic exaltation. Let the child stand before the father and ask him, "Father, why must I love you?" And if he is unable to provide a satisfactory answer, the child has a right to look upon him as a stranger and even an enemy. After all, who doesn't desire his father's death?
As you saw by the end, this was kind of thinking about the notion of father as basically a singular past or a singular origin. I was trying to kind of overcome that or reject that through suggesting that this idea is a concept. It's not just a biological connection. It's a concept that one can overcome and that one can deny, and that in the present world, हम जिस तरह से multiple pasts consume कर सकते हैं, we have the right to choose our own conceptual fathers, right? We are not given these pairs. So interestingly, this work was also, it was edited through code. So every time you would play the video, it would play a different version. So what I had done was that there were 50 different cuts, and with each cut, there were 3 possible clips that could be played. And the code determined कि अब पहला clip play होगा, अब दूसरा होगा, अब तीसरा होगा, and therefore made its way through the whole 50 units. And I calculated it actually that how many probabilities were there of the whole video. There were 6.7 quintillion probabilities, and that if we put them together one after the other, it would take longer than the age of the universe to actually play the video. So I quite enjoyed that impossibility of complete knowledge, since that's something that I've been working with. This is a work perhaps that you guys might have seen since it was made in Lahore at the Mansion Residency. I was thinking a lot in this one about the relationship of voice with the body, of language as speech, and thinking about also the supposed neutrality, authority, omnipresence of this voice. So what I was trying to do was that I started imitating auto-generated voices. So for example, जिस तरह आपको डेवू की बस में एक announcement नहीं होती शुरू में कि अस्सलाम वालेकुम डेवू पे, you know, etc. etc. And I just found those like voices auto-generated really fascinating because they don't fully belong to any culture, but also in one sense they can't fully be ever South Asian, right? Like I cannot like the Devu voices kind of are funny, right? Because they're trying to emulate an accent that's not theirs. And so I started thinking about how we assign these voices to machines, right? How is Siri a woman, and why does she have this North American accent? And you know, how do they speak in this particular way? And the work was less about, you know, thinking about that bias and more about the idea that that a voice could exist without a body, right? That there could be a voice जिसकी कोई physical manifestation नहीं है. So I also started looking at the text that is auto-generated. For example, when you try to send an email without, you know, a message in the body, it would tell you that this message has no body text. And I thought that that was such a poetic line actually fed to us by a machine, kind of an instrumental thing, but if you start taking it literally, you start to find potential in it. So I put together this kind of dialogue between two voices, both of them my own, the left and the right channel. They were saying things that were more or less like auto-generated messages and you know, also imitating that sound. And this was installed alongside a sculpture with a body of water, like a thin layer of water below jiske niche ye text hai. And the frequencies that would run through that sculpture would bring the water alive, as in it would start to move in these particular ways. And so I felt in a way, these voices started to get a body, right? The body of water right there. So it felt almost impossible that a voice could exist without a body. I'm just going to play a small video documentation of it. Oh, I guess I have not put the video documentation in the slide. Never mind. I'll try to pull it up at the end. This next work is now, I think, kind of thematically marking a little bit of a shift. So I had been thinking about the idea of language for a while and thinking about it in terms of, you know, its form, in terms of its, you know, philosophy, etc., etc. But really to overcome language, it feels like an impossible feat, right? And I recognize that. I you know, thrive in that impossibility. But also, like, I started thinking about how language actually is a human thing, right? It's a human, supposedly a human quality, one that distinguishes us from everything else. So the idea of human exceptionalism, कि इंसान बाकी चीज़ों से मुख्तलिफ है, ये बहुत हद तक it's a function of language, right? So I started to think about language, if it could possibly exist from a perspective other than human. And I recognize again that these are all kind of paradoxical attempts, right? Because this is a limitation that one cannot overcome. But I look towards the history of art and I see that paradoxical attempts have always been made. You know, complete abstraction is impossible, complete figuration is impossible, representation is impossible, so on and so forth. So I'm just going to play us this video. This is called Hairless, in which a city basically starts to lose its hair. And it's a very small thing that goes wrong with it. And hair is not an evolutionary necessity anymore, right? हमें इसकी ज़रूरत नहीं है. But as it starts to disappear, a lot of things start to fall apart as well. And what kind of, you know, longings does it create? I'm going to play it and then I'll speak about it a little bit.
a city of hairless creatures. Eager evolution overdeed its young. It fell. Slowly, gently, at first. And then, in perversely delightful lumps, now, there are lives from in full view of surveillance devices. All manners of hair care products are housed in a museum. Many labels expire. Goosebumps are alleged that our mighty warriors touch cold fear have given up on. Everyone aches to kiss fuzzy upper lips. Everyone is homesick.
was just a little bit early. So again, like I said, it's a small thing, hair which is not needed, according to evolutionary, necessities. But if it goes missing, then everything starts to fall apart. It's kind of like a soft apocalypse, and so this tactile, experience, the sensory experience is really desired, and it creates a sense of eco-anxiety. I'm just going to play this documentation of the work that I had shown earlier. That was made with auto-generated voices.
This message has no body text. This message has no body text. This message has nobody. This message was sent but not delivered, kept but not close, understood but hardly, understood and then deleted, deleted and forgotten, forgotten and rotten. This message is rotten, was still rotting when found. This message was found. This message was cared for, loved, nurtured in a home. This message was saved. This message is archived. This message now recovered, it recovered, but had no body. This message has no body text, no attachment, no fine print, no terms of service, no longer available, no past, no future, no need to prove that you're not a robot. This message is not seen. This message is a machine. This message is a bearer in error. This message repents. This message is unsent. This message will tell. This message will find you in hell. This message is paid for by nobody. This message is signed. This message has never been far from my mind. This message is 10% real, 90% auto-generated, 10% intended, 90% fated. This message is intended solely for the recipient, now old and bent. This message is marked as spam, junk, open call, corner blocked, laugh check, finance. This message is a Lord portal, a hyperlink. This message needs stitches. This message is infected. This message has no body. This message is a gentle reminder that this message will now self-destruct. This message is expired. Please subscribe. Your free trial is over.
I think I'm going to pause here. I wanted to discuss my latest work a little bit, but I think we might not have the time. Okay, maybe in 2 minutes. So this is the work that was recently installed at Karachi Biennale. This is called Speaking in Tongues. And this was an interactive video from the perspective of somebody who's in exile or who has suddenly appeared in this new world. Basically, you wake up one day और आप एक लामहदूद से जंगल में हैं और अब आपको देखना है कि आपने क्या करना है. So basically, the protagonist starts to make sense of the world, and there are 3 different endings to it. One in which she starts speaking to a cloud, another in which a plant slowly grows invasive and starts to take over her mind, and a third one in which she slowly realizes that she's inside a photograph. This was, the image that I'm showing you actually is an illustration of the Madyha, which was kind of like a small point of origin for the work. This is a Sanskrit poetic format called Sandesa Kavya, the most famous one of which is Madyha, in which a message is sent usually through a non-human agency. So this, Yakshi is exiled because he's too much in love with his wife to carry out his duties. And once he's in exile, he tries to convince a cloud to take a message back to his wife. And in that, it's also a political act because he's kind of mapping India at the time. He's telling him कि तुम यहाँ पे रुकोगे, ये जंगल आएगा, ये शहर आएगा, ये नदी आएगी. so on and so forth. But more than the mapping, what interested me was the idea that you could speak to a cloud. Right, and I started to think that this is actually something kind of prevalent in our culture, you know, sending message through a pigeon or through the wind. And so I started to think more about that, and I kind of, designed this interactive piece. So it's played in both English and Urdu. You can choose your language. And at certain moments in the video, it will give you these choices, जो कि आप on these 4 buttons choices कर सकते हैं. Or eventually जो है आप you'll arrive at one of 3 endings. I found that this was an interesting, for me this idea kind of really kind of excavated what it meant to be human, because it was thinking about the limitations of or the autonomy of a human being in this world, which is kind of non-existence. So, since the rise of evolutionary thought, since Charles Darwin, we've understood that we are just one piece in the evolutionary puzzle. We're not something new or something unique. We're just arrived at through, this process, and that every other organism is kind of a part of the same process. And then, through industrialization, we've also kind of overcome the barrier between human and machine, right? So, for example, your camera is your eye, right? Or your, whatever mechanized things you use, such as a car, such as an airplane, they are taking your body from one place to another. So they kind of become extensions of the human. And in the third one, we also overcome the idea of humans and complex machines. So for example, the notion of Photoshop, right? Who really is doing the work? You're giving commands to a certain computer, and that is, interpreting it, and that is then enacting it, but you've also humans have also designed that. But sometimes these machines, overcome their own limitations, etc., etc. So basically, we're now at a point where the end of the human and the starting of the machine or organism is no longer clearly defined. And this is kind of something that I find of interest in cyberfeminism, in particularly in the writings of Donna Haraway. And the work was also kind of influenced by that. I'm just going to play a small clip of this. Basically, जो ending है, I will just play that, and then we can have questions.
पहली दफा जब बादल बोला, तो मुझे समझ न आई कि मैंने क्या सुना है. हवा के झोंके पर बस हल्की सी सरसराहट महसूस हुई, जिसको बमुश्किल कोई बोली कहा जा सकता है. अगले चंद दिन बादल मामूल की तरह मेरी खिड़की पर आता रहा, लेकिन बिल्कुल खामोश था. मैंने समझा कि शायद मेरा वहम है, और मैं इस सान्हे को जल्द ही भूल गई. दूसरी दफा जब बादल मुझसे मुखातिब हुआ, तो शक की कोई गुंजाइश नहीं रही. क्या मुझे कुछ पानी मिल सकता है? उसने खांसते हुए पूछा. मैं हैरत से बिल्कुल दंग रह गई. बादल जैसे मेरे जवाब का इंतजार कर रहा था. मैंने उसे अपना सवाल दोहराने को कहा, और बिलाशुबा वो वही जुमला फिर से बोला. बोलते हुए उसकी शक्ल में कोई तब्दीली नहीं आई. पानी, मुझे सख्त प्यास लगी है. उस दिन के बाद हमने आपस में अक्सर गुफ्तगू की. हालांकि बादल दुनिया को बहुत अच्छी तरह जानता था और अक्सर आर्ट, साइंस, सकाफत और फलसफा जैसे मौज़ूआत पर तवील तकारीर करता था, मुझे भरोसा नहीं था कि क्या ये वाकई इन बातों को समझता है या सुनी सुनाई रट्टा लगाकर दोहराता रहता है. हो सकता है कि बादल इंसान से भी ज्यादा ज़हीन हो. ये भी हो सकता है कि इसकी बातें सिर्फ एक सतही सा फरेब हो. बादल उस पौधे से भी मानूस था और अक्सर मुझे उसके बढ़ते हुए फैलाव से आगाह करता रहता था. ऐसे मालूम होता था कि बादल को पौधे से हसद सी है. खैर, हमारी बातचीत जारी रही. चूंकि मेरे अल्फाज इस बादल के खाली कान, एक बंद डायरी और फोटोज के अलावा कहाँ ही कोई पनाह पा सकते थे. हमारी गुफ्तगू अक्सर लंबी और चकरा देने वाली होती. बादल का कोई नाम ना था. جب میں نے اس سے پوچھا کہ بادل ہونا کیسا محسوس ہوتا ہے تو وہ ہنس دیا اور بولا کہ اسے نہیں معلوم. میرے خیال میں وہ ہنسی ہی تھی کیونکہ وہ اس کی عام آواز سے ذرا مختلف تھی. مجھے یہ معلوم نہیں ہے کہ ہنسی مذاق پر تھی یا سوال کے نہ سمجھ آنے پر. بادل نے واپس مجھ سے بھی یہی سوال پوچھا, انسان ہونا کیسا محسوس ہوتا ہے. میں نے کئی دن اس سوال پر غور کیا. اس کا جواب کسی غیر انسانی شے سے سوال